Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast brought to you by the Sunderland Echo. My name is Jason Jones, joined by James Copley. Feels like a while since we've done one of these, James. Plenty of football to discuss, and obviously we are in the midst of the January transfer window now as well, so we'll have a good discussion about any potential deals that might be happening on Weir's side as well. Like I say, though, lots of football over that busy festive period. Most recently, a 1-0 win over Portsmouth on Sunday afternoon for Sunderland. Just interested to get your thoughts on that game, because it was a match in which Sunderland, in my opinion, were good value for the 3 points, but they had some dicey moments as well. I'm just sort of interested to see what you made of it.
I think Sunderland definitely deserved to win. I thought they were good in the first half, if not a little bit sloppy. Potentially could have been out of sight. Wonderful finish by Wilson Isidore. There was a couple of penalty shouts as well. Perhaps one was outside of the box. That was on Dennis Serkin just after half time. Mayenda, did he go down a little bit too soft? Possibly, a bit theatrically, but you have seen them given, and we have seen them given recently as well in the Championship. Yeah, Sunderland perhaps a little bit wasteful. I thought Mayenda, although he got the assist for Wilson Isidore's goal, there was a couple of opportunities where he could have done better with his attempt on goal, or maybe just finding a man and getting his head up. But 19, still very raw. It just got really nervy towards the end, didn't it? Which was unfortunate. But to be honest, I can give them a pass because we've largely used the same 11, 12, 13 players over the Christmas period. I think it's a good opportunity. We said on our post-match video yesterday, didn't we, that it's a good opportunity now for some of these players to get a rest, with Stoke City in the FA Cup coming up on Saturday, and then it's Burnley the week after, and then Derby in quick succession. So you would think and hope that LeBruce is going to sort of rotate, give a couple of young players a look, a couple of fringe players an opportunity against Stoke City on Saturday. And that's not to disrespect the FA Cup. We all love the FA Cup. We all know Sunderland's history. But it just makes sense, I think, given Sunderland's squad. You know, Portsmouth going down to 10 men as well. Sunderland really should have put that game to bed. I do get the argument that, you know, good teams will really put other teams to the sword in that scenario. It didn't happen. I think you can flip it and say it's positive that Sunderland managed to grind out that result. And, you know, it's the 6th of January and we're still unbeaten at home in this season, which is a brilliant achievement given the hammering we got off Blackburn towards the end of last season. We got beaten by Sheffield Wednesday last season. You know, I remember, what was it, 6 years ago, something like that, we went nearly a calendar year without winning at home. So, yeah, I think there's lots of positives to take coming out of the festive period for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've just sort of mentioned it there. It was a point that Regis Lebris made after the game, wasn't it? That Sunderland have now played, was it 5 games in 15 days or something like that? And he hasn't got a great deal of depth in his squad at the moment because of injuries and because of absences. Obviously, some really important and high-profile players missing for Sunderland at the present moment in time. And as part of that, it sort of necessitated this move to a 4-4-2, hasn't it? It's you know, we've seen Mayenda line up alongside Isidore, like as an actual 2-man attack, which is not something that we would have necessarily expected from Regis Lebris, knowing what we know about the way that he likes to set up, generally speaking. I mean, Sunderland played that way against Sheffield United as well on New Year's Day. Got a really good result there, 2-1 win at the Stadium of Light. Again, just sort of interested to get your feelings on that formation, because it feels as if Sunderland gain quite a lot from it, but they also maybe lose a little bit as well.
No, absolutely. You gain Isidore working with Mayenda, and it looks to have given Isidore a little bit of a new lease of life, doesn't it? They clearly combining very well together. They're getting goals and they're getting assists for each other. Excuse me. So it's clearly hugely positive in that scenario. I think you have to credit Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham as well, who've gone from playing in a 3 to playing in a 2. But just naturally, you will lose control of some games. We did see it a little bit against Sheffield United, and we definitely saw it against Portsmouth at times. Having a midfield too, whilst it provides benefits up front, and Sunderland actually have sort of developed this really good pattern of play through the middle with their strikers now, because they're so fast and they're so pacey that they can play off each other, that the focus really is sort of gone from the wings into the middle of the pitch, hasn't it, with those two up front. That does mean that you can have your wingers sort of tuck in, which does help alleviate it. But I think we did see against Portsmouth that the game can look like getting away from you just about. I think Britt Lee on YouTube poses a really interesting question: can we play two up top during away games? And you do wonder whether Sunderland's next away game, Burnley, against a promotion rival, whether Lebris would revert to a 4-3-3, given the personnel at his disposal. That just feels like one where you would probably like to keep it tight. However, we know Lebris is a fairly attacking manager, and since his switch to 4-4-2, it's really done wonders. But again, I think you actually have to credit the group and credit the head coach as well, because Sunderland's injury list is really extensive at the moment, and there's a lot of good players to come back into that squad. We're obviously in the January transfer window now, which we'll come to. But yeah, it's been good to see that tactical flexibility, I think, from Lebris, and it's good that actually Sunderland are developing a couple of ways of playing in the Championship. I think good teams have sort of multiple strings to the bow. And we all love two good strikers up front at Sunderland, don't we? It feels like a bit of a throwback at the moment. I sort of tongue-in-cheek mentioned Super Kev and Quinny during the game against Portsmouth, and you sort of get those vibes, don't you? I'm not saying it's as good or it will be as prolific or we'll finish seventh in the Premier League twice in a row, but there's a good strong heritage of that, the glory days at Sunderland under Peter Reid. So I'm enjoying it. It feels nice and nostalgic. We just need a Summerby and an Alan Johnston, left and right wing, and maybe a Stefan Schwartz in the middle or something, and the glory days are back.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? We spoke about it on the post-match reaction video, but this is not just two players who've sort of been stuck up there and a make and do. Like, this is actually an effective strike partnership. They dovetail nicely. They're playing off each other nicely. It's 2 assists from Mayenda for Isidore now in 2 matches. There's clearly a really good working relationship there. And I think you can see it in the way that they interact outside of in-game moments as well. The celebrations, the post-match celebrations, like, they're clearly two players who are enjoying and appreciating playing alongside each other, and I think that's a really positive thing for Sunderland, as well as the fact, and again, it's something you sort of alluded to there, but Sunderland don't have to be set in their ways. They don't have to come out and say, right, we are playing 4-4-2 every week now. That is in concrete and nothing's going to change. There are going to be games where Lebris, when he has a full contingent available to him, maybe does feel the need to go to a 4-4-2. I think that there are certainly merits to it against teams who are willing to come at you a little bit more. I think against a low block, this is sort of a phrase that we hear a lot and has sort of become a bit of a boogie word, isn't it? Like low block, but genuinely, like against those teams who are willing to sort of set up and frustrate you, might not always be the most effective, but at least Sunderland now know that they have the option of going a different way. It doesn't always have to be the 4-3-3, and it doesn't always have to be, relying on the wingers. And there are different patterns of play, different ways of getting at teams, and different ways of hurting different opponents. So it hasn't necessarily been something that we would have expected, and it has kind of been forced upon Regis Lebris. But I do think that these past couple of games have really shown a different side of Sunderland and a really positive alternative for the head coach as well. So I think that's something that has to be lauded. Looking at
I think with the 4-4-2 as well, like, those two are so pacey up front that it's almost catching teams out. Like Portsmouth in the first 10 minutes, you were looking at them just thinking, like, what are you doing? Because they'd clearly come. They try and play decent football under the head coach, to be fair to them, and they've yielded some decent results after a terrible start. So he's clearly got something about him, and I thought he was very impressive in his post-match presser as well. But like, they were trying to play out from the back, they were trying to play out from the goalkeeper. They had a really high line, and it was so easy for Sunderland really in the opening stages, wasn't it? And I think when you play two up front like that, and they're so fast and so dynamic and they can play off each other, if you're trying to play football at the back, then you're going to have to be careful, because those two can really press. We've seen Wilson show elements of pressing, but he's been up front sort of by himself, so it's been very difficult. Sunderland haven't necessarily played with a lot of the ball either. But with those two up front, I agree, it does create a different dynamic. Whether that's sustainable, as I mentioned, against a Burnley away from home or whatever, I think definitely remains to be seen, but it's definitely a good weapon to have.
Yeah, it is. The way I sort of described it, I wrote a piece over the weekend that it sort of felt like the Sheffield United match to me felt a bit like a judo match, in the sense that the more that Sheffield United committed, the more Sunderland were just waiting to trip them and use that sort of their own weight against them, and counteract that. And they have done it well. They have done it well, and obviously not just in terms of goals, but the Marlon Pack sending off yesterday, it came directly from Wilson's press. He nicked it off his toe, as we've seen him do so many times this season, to be fair, but it obviously led to the red card. And I think that, with the exception of that last 5 minutes, that was when Sunderland looked at their most dangerous. When Portsmouth went down to 10 men, they were sort of trying to readjust to what they had to do to stay in the game. I thought Sunderland should have been out of sight at that point. Obviously weren't able to bury the chances and bury the game, but again, it comes from the strikers. It comes from Isidore forcing a mistake, forcing a sending off, and ultimately giving Sunderland the advantage in the game, for a decent period of the contest. Just sort of looking at the festive period more broadly, James, obviously, if we go from Boxing Day, a late draw against Blackburn Rovers, disappointing late draw, I think it's fair to say, given the manner in which Sunderland threw away a 2-1 lead. Then obviously defeat against managerless Stoke City, bounce back with a really good win over Sheffield United, and then follow that up with a pretty routine, but still a decent 3 points against Portsmouth as well. I mean, taking those 4 games as a whole, do you think Sunderland will be pleased with that return?
To be honest, I think you've got to be. It's just one of those things in football, isn't it? That over Christmas, teams are going to drop points and there's going to be late goals. Things are going to happen. Lebris rightly pointed towards the fact that Sunderland have played 5 games in 15 days. Yes, it is the same for every other club over the festive period. But that's why you see mad results like, Hull City coming from 3-1 down to draw against Leeds United and all of that sort of stuff. Sheffield United have dropped points to us. So when you look at it, when you look at the league, yes, we've had a couple of disappointing results. Stoke was hugely disappointing. We could have won that game against Blackburn. But Sunderland are now 3 points off the top of the league, and we're actually 11 clear of Blackburn in 7th place. So if you look at it as a whole, Sunderland have actually come out of the festive period, and I would say it's like a net positive. They've closed the gap on the top 2. That's now looking attainable, whereas sort of at one point it looked like it could just be slipping away. And there's also a really, really nice buffer now separating, playoff sides and non-playoff sides. So I think it has to be a positive. The flip side to that is, it was such a good opportunity to go to Stoke and win down there. And arguably on the balance of play, the balance of chances, they should have had at least a point, if not the win. If they'd have got the win there and then beaten Blackburn, hadn't conceded that late goal, or Mayender had got the winner, then suddenly you are like top of the league. So there is that as well. So I do understand the frustrations, but I just think that over Christmas, mad things tend to happen. It's so busy. Teams drop points. It's just the golden rule of football. You look further afield in the Premier League. It's such a busy time, and Liverpool should have beaten Man United last night on form. They didn't. They dropped points. Chelsea have dropped points over Christmas, haven't been in an electric form. So I think it's just sort of one of those things that happens. I think the pleasing thing is that Sunderland managed to bounce back, because I think you can have your season's objectives derailed over Christmas quite seriously, given the amount of games that come. But Sunderland actually bounced back, got 2 wins, one against a promotion rival. So I see that as hugely positive, to be honest. Yes, there are elements and things that will need to be improved for sure, but I think it's positive to only lose 1 game over that festive period, definitely.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I think at the moment, the key is sort of keeping pace, isn't it? I think that obviously this is outside of Sunderland's control, but if we're looking at a situation where, you drop those points against Blackburn and Stoke, and then that then allows Burnley, Sheffield United, Leeds United to really sort of open up a bit of a gap, which, I think there have been points over the past few weeks where we've sort of been a little bit worried that might start to happen. Then I think it's a much bigger concern. But you're absolutely right. I think that we're sort of going to have to accept, I think we're going to have to accept over the course of the season that the Championship is not how it was last year. Last year we saw Leicester City, Ipswich Town really pull away, really sort of accelerate away from the rest of the chasing pack. And they were always looking as if they were going to be the teams to secure automatic promotion. I think this season, the very nature of those 4 teams scrapping it out, and then the fact that the rest of the division, as generally the way of the Championship, but is highly competitive. I think there are going to be a lot of teams dropping points, and I think that as long as Sunderland can, it's almost a case of timing, but if they can keep securing those positive results when it matters, when the backs are against the wall, and when they're able to maybe dig out 6 points in 2 games over the course of a week and really just put themselves back into contention, if they can keep on moving forward, if the momentum is overall generally positive, then I think that they put themselves in a really good position to hopefully have an outside, not even an outside chance, but a chance of making those automatics. I still think that playoffs are a much more realistic aim, and I think the fact that they've opened up that 11-point gap over 7th is a huge thing, because I think that if anybody at the start of the season had said that we'd be in the new year, first week of the new year, and someone would be in that position, regardless of what the automatic picture was looking like, I think that every Sunderland fan would have bitten your hand off for that, given what happened at the end of last season. So I think that overall Sunderland have to be really happy with where they're at, and I think that there are going to be disappointments. There are going to be results that you look at and you go, should have held on for the win against Blackburn. Probably should have got something against Stoke. But you mentioned it there. Leeds United would look at the Hull City game over the weekend and say exactly the same. I think every team is going to have those results, and as long as Sunderland are able to keep on picking up the points in the manner that they are at the moment, if they're able to keep pace in the manner that they are at the moment, then they have to be praised for that, and it has to be seen as a positive, like you say.
I think as well, Jake, you're right to point towards the league being as it is. It's very, very tight at the top. And I just think as well, like I think you're right. I think at the moment we're a playoff team with an outside shot at reaching the automatics. I think January obviously could aid that. But I'm encouraged as well for a few reasons. Obviously, we've played everybody once now. Some teams we've played twice, Stoke and Sheffield United. But I haven't really seen anything which has really concerned me. I haven't seen us come up against a team and not be able to compete. Yes, we've lost games, we've dropped points. The 2-2 against Leeds United at the Stadium of Light, there was a period of that where I thought Leeds were really in the ascendancy, but then Sunderland actually managed to sort of flip that back around. So without sort of being arrogant and big-headed, as I say, Sunderland will probably lose again before the end of the season. But I don't think there's anything to fear now, which I think is positive for that young group as well. I think that could be quite, it could give them quite a lot of confidence. That they've had a look at everybody, they've played everybody once, they know they've got nothing to fear, they know that can compete. It sort of emboldens your attitude, doesn't it? It gives you that little bit of arrogance with the players that are set to come back as well. So, yeah, as we'll probably come on to talk about now, I do think there is an opportunity here in January to really go and do something, because that league is wide open at the top. And every time you think a team's going to pull away a little bit, they don't capitalise on that opportunity. And Leeds is a classic example.
Absolutely. Well, like you say, obviously January transfer window, I think it's going to be on a lot of people's minds at the moment, especially given the position that Sunderland find themselves in. I mean, let's just discuss a few names. There are a few rumours doing the rounds already. Just interested to sort of get your feelings on those. The latest one being Enzo Lefebvre, obviously currently on the books at AS Roma, signed for them, quite a big money move, has to be said. Has worked with Regis Lebris before, central midfielder, worked with him at Lorient. I mean, do you think this is one that has legs? Do you think this could potentially happen?
I mean, this isn't based on any sort of insider knowledge at all. I have no information about this transfer other than what has been reported elsewhere. I think it makes sense in several ways. Obviously, Regis Lebris really, really likes the player. You would presume that Lefebvre really likes Lebris as well, having worked with him at Lorient for so long as a head coach, and when Lebris was part of the youth setup as well. So, reading between the lines, I'm guessing Lebris has sort of brought him through over several seasons. I mean, he's made 208 first-team appearances across his career already, which is hugely impressive for a 24-year-old. So, in terms of him needing a career revival, and Lebris maybe he's having the pull or the sway to get that deal done, I could absolutely sort of see it from that regard. However, I also think you have to note that he is worth 20 million quid. I think Real Betis had been mentioned as a potential suitor. That sort of seems to have been nixed in the past 24 hours. That one doesn't look like it's going to go ahead. By all accounts, he's a very good player. I mean, you probably have to be to get bought by Roma in Serie A for 20 million quid. Obviously, it's not worked from there under Claudio Ranieri. I think Roma are on to the third manager of the season. So in terms of him needing a home and a manager who's going to believe in him, I can absolutely see it. But he's probably going to have other suitors as well, and that probably muddies the water. Could it give Sunderland an advantage that he knows Lebris definitely? As always, these things tend to come down to money. What's the best financial package for Roma? Will it be a loan? Will it be an option to buy? What can Sunderland offer? You know, Christian Speakman's talked about those non-cash benefits of, you know, coming to a club like Sunderland, the Academy of Light, all of those things, the opportunity to play. But I think Sunderland actually are a really attractive destination, regardless of what happens with this transfer. I mean, the 3 points off the automatics, chance to play in the Premier League next season. Hopefully, you would think a chance to sort of be involved in that end of season running. You know, Sunderland have done well with younger players. I know he's 24, but he'd probably come and play, gets a chance to play with other good young players in a club that really believes in them. So I could see it happening from that point of view, but it's just so unpredictable, isn't it? You don't know what's going to happen. And perhaps maybe the thing we're missing as well is that because of the Lebris connection, that it's an easy link to make. You see these sort of links pop up all of the time. So it's exciting. I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I would quite like us to sign him despite having never seen him play, but his profile certainly really excites me. So want to watch. Hopefully it doesn't become another Alexander Mendy and goes and goes and goes, and we're sick of hearing about him by the end of it. But yeah, you know, all bets are off, I would say.
I'm just waiting until the Alexander Mendy links reappear, to be honest with you, mate. I'm still haunted by that summer saga. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think you're right. I think that the Lebris connection is an easy one to make. I think, you know, it's telling that this is coming from the French media as well. I think that, you know, that probably plays into that a little bit. But I do also think that it's interesting that while this would be a hugely ambitious move from someone, while it would be a massive coup if it were to come off, rather, just based on where the players are, how much money he went for recently, all that sort of stuff. You know, I do think it's interesting that it doesn't feel wholly unrealistic. The fact that Sunderland have put themselves in a position where they are actually able to be linked with these players, and we're not just immediately dismissing it out of hand. You know, I think that speaks volumes to how far they've come in such a short period of time under Regis Lebris, you know, and I think they have to be commended for that. I think everything you've said is absolutely right. In terms of Sunderland being a destination where a player like Lefebvre could come in and potentially sort of reignite himself a little bit, maybe, you know, rekindle the traits that convinced Roma to go and sign him in the first place. I actually think that, you know, and I say this without being biased, or at least trying not to be biased, I don't think there are many places, certainly in England, that you'd look at and say would be a better option than Sunderland. You know, I think they've got a track record at this point of being able to bring players who are maybe faltering a little bit and sort of coaxing them back to a position of real prominence and giving them the game time, the opportunity to go and express themselves and to sort of realise some of that potential which might have dissipated a little bit. So in that sense, I think, you know, it's not completely out of the question, but I do think it's one that I'm a little bit wary of. I'm a little bit wary of until I see something to convince me otherwise, is what I would probably say. By that same metric, another midfielder who Sunderland have been linked with, Glenn Kamara, obviously was on the books at Leeds, left to go and join Stade Rennais over in France. He's a player who has been mentioned as a possible loan option in recent weeks. I mean, is he a player rather who you think would bring something to Sunderland if that were to happen?
I mean, I think so. He's a very, very capable player, isn't he? We've seen that at Rangers and Leeds. Hugely experienced, 29 years old now. I get the feeling that one, and I might be completely wrong about this, probably hinges on how well Samed does when he comes back. Obviously, he's out on the grass now. This mythical player that we're all pinning our promotion hopes on is due to come back at some point. So I'd be interested to see how that affects it. You know, Lebris has obviously hinted that he would like additions in midfield, and we can understand that, can't we? Because obviously, you know, Riggs had his injury, Joe Bellingham's played a lot of football, so has Dan Neil. But you've sort of got to counteract that with, if Glenn Kamara comes in for 6 months, does that harm the development of one of these players? It has to be a balance, doesn't it? Obviously, there's a lot of games, things happen, injury, so you'd like the cover if possible, and you'd like the experience if possible. But it's it's an interesting one, that one. I think he's probably going to have a lot of suitors as well. So Sunderland will be competing in a crowded market. But a 6-month loan deal for a 29-year-old with championship experience, with experience playing at the top level, I think it makes quite a lot of sense, really, doesn't it? He's quite clearly a good player, would quite clearly bring something. But will it work with Sunderland's squad on a short-term basis? I don't see why not. That one seems to have got a little bit quieter, though, doesn't it? For the moment, there hasn't been as much noise about that, which can mean a multitude of things. It could mean something's really close and we don't know about it, or could mean that there's nothing in it at all. Again, don't really have much insight on that one other than what's been reported elsewhere. So another one where you've just got to suck it and see, I think.
Absolutely. And then, of course, another name who I feel like is going to be mentioned an awful lot on Weir's side, and to be fair, across the championship this month is Louis Barry, recalled by Aston Villa, presumably with view to being sent out on loan again. Although I do know that the Telegraph were reporting last week that Villa could look to cash in on him on a permanent basis, which again, bearing in mind how much you would expect they would ask for him, might not be the best news in the world for Sunderland. Obviously, we've spoke about Barry already on this podcast, James, but just interested to get your view on that one as well, because obviously a player who predominantly plays on the left is capable of playing across a front three, has impressed immensely in League One this season, and I don't think there's anybody would argue that he is deserving of a shot at a higher level. I mean, do you think that he is the sort of attacking reinforcement that Sunderland should be looking to bring in over the course of the next few weeks?
I think so. He's clearly a good player. You know, we spoke about it on the podcast. If you can score goals when you're chasing automatic promotion, then fantastic. You know, you need variety. We spoke about the Ipswich example of last year. What I think is interesting about Barry is Unai Emery spoke about it a little bit over the weekend, and he doesn't really seem sure what he's going to do with him yet. He sort of left the door open for him to go and contribute at Aston Villa this season if they need him. He also mentioned that he's got a little bit of a niggling injury at the moment, which sounds like it would be right up Sunderland Street given recent recruitment options. And then he said, you know, he could go on loan and he could be sold. So it does feel like there's a lot of work to do on that one. Again, there's going to be pretty much every club in the Championship, I would imagine, would be interested in Louis Barry. So I think that type of player definitely. Will he definitely sign for Sunderland? I don't know. But again, basically what we said about Lefay, isn't it? That Sunderland are a really attractive place for youngsters to go. You know, you need only look at the likes of Jack Clark and Patrick Roberts, who've done well at Sunderland in an attacking sense over the years. He will play, he will get game time, and he's an exciting player. So, but yeah, with all of these transfers, it's always multifaceted, isn't it? What do Aston Villa want? What does Louis Barry want? Although I did notice that he dropped a like on, I think you wrote the story, Jace, because we all write about Instagram likes these days. Slim pickings, isn't it? But yeah, he did like a comment saying that you should go to Sunderland. So does that mean anything in the modern world? I don't know. Could it be an indication? I'm not saying it is or it isn't. Could it be significant? I don't know. It depends how far you read into these things, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say I've been burned by Instagram before. I'm a Diallo's busy thumbs and all that sort of stuff. I think we've been here before. Should we discuss some? I was going to say possible outgoings, but might not be that pressing. But certainly some interest in a possible outgoing in the future. Matty Young is doing phenomenally well at Salford City at the moment. Is it now 8 clean sheets in 9? Something ludicrous like that. The sort of record that just doesn't happen in modern football. But he's playing wonderfully well for Salford City. So well, in fact, that he is said to be attracting interest from Manchester City, who Salford play in the FA Cup this weekend as well. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Because he is really, really impressive at the moment, isn't he?
You know, he's a tremendous prospect, like a real top tier prospect, and I think there's just going to be interest generally in him throughout the transfer window and beyond. But Sunderland are in a really good position. He signed a new contract in November, which isn't that long ago, which runs until 2028. So I think to dislodge him from Sunderland, it would take mega money. I think from the impression I get, he's very level-headed and down to earth. Again, he understands that Sunderland is a really good opportunity for him, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, to go and play regularly and learn his trade further. Obviously, the glaring example is Anthony Patterson, who's done so well. Matty Young's also a Sunderland fan from a Sunderland supporting family. So my guess is that he would quite like to pull on the red and white of Sunderland, or the green goalkeeper jersey of Sunderland, for a prolonged period of time before moving on. Or, he might be at Sunderland for 10 years and we might achieve loads of things with Matty Young. But I get the impression he would like to tick that off his bucket list before. But he's a ridiculous prospect. I think is it 7 and 8 in the league, but then 8 and 9 in the FA Cup, or it might be a rung above that. But he's done really well to break into the side. Jamie Jones, 35-year-old goalkeeper, I think ex-Middlesbrough, was the first choice under Carl Robinson during the early part of the season. Matt Young's done really well to force himself into Salford's plans with a couple of excellent cup performances, saving penalties left, right and centre. Got under the radar a bit, but he played for England under 18s, under 19s and under 20s in one calendar year. Now, I need to do some digging, but I don't know if anybody's ever done that before. There might be somebody, but that's a pretty mean feat. I don't think really there's any need for him to be thinking about moving currently. I don't think he will go. He's got a really interesting second half of the season coming up at Salford, who, as you say, play Manchester City in the FA Cup. Will he get the nod for that game, or will it go back to Jamie Jones? I think that remains to be seen. So that's an interesting sort of subplot leading up to this week. Salford City as well. They're in the automatic promotion spots in League Two. So he's got a big 6 months coming up, and it's he's a hugely exciting prospect. But in terms of Sunderland first team credentials, obviously I don't see him leaving anytime soon. I think a lot will depend on what happens with Anthony Patterson, which again in turn could depend on which division Sunderland are in. If Sunderland don't get promoted this season, I could feasibly see us keep and hold a Patterson. Yes, I could also see him going. If Sunderland get promoted to the Premier League, would Patterson want to leave? I don't know. Will there still be interest in him in 6 to 12 months' time? So that's sort of really, really, it's not a blocker for Matty Young, but you're going to have a little bit of competition there. One thing that's said about Matty Young as well is that he really, really enhances that goalkeeping group when he does train with Sunderland. He does come back and train every now and again. And that goalkeeping group's very good, very tight, obviously with Simon Moore and Barcarina, the goalkeeping coach as well. But Matty Young really does sort of help push standards up and drive standards, all of that sort of stuff. And it's good to have sort of a young, hungry kid around the place. I've rambled on a bit there, but he is hugely exciting. I don't think he's going to go. And I do genuinely see him as a potential Sunderland number one. I just don't know when that happens. But there is a scenario that exists where, and it's perhaps maybe a little bit unlikely, but Matty Young starts for Salford against Manchester City, has a blinder, and then suddenly, he is the heir apparent to Patterson in the summer. You just don't know how these things are going to work.
Yeah, I think the key thing with him is his age, really, isn't it? He's not. I think if he was 2 or 3 years older and he was 2 or 3 years closer to Patterson in age, then I think maybe there'd perhaps be a little bit more of a pressing need for him to be considering his options. But I think the fact that Patterson continues to attract attention, and I think the fact that Young is so young, for want of a better word, then I think there is a real. You can see a potential succession plan, is what I'm trying to say. You can foresee a situation where Patterson does maybe move on and Young maybe does establish himself. So there's no rush. There's no rush for him. I think that the fact that he signed that contract, the fact that he is so young, just got to keep doing what he's doing, really, doesn't he? He's really impressed for Salford. Yeah. And, if he keeps on playing the way that he's playing, then the world is genuinely going to be his oyster. So I think that...
you're right to mention his age as well, because, an 18-year-old goalkeeper feasibly has another 22 years left in the game, 22 seasons perhaps. That gets him to 40. Some players even play beyond that. So, he's got time on his side, hasn't he?
Yeah, massively. And just 3 names who I feel like we're going to keep on talking about a lot over the course of January as well. 3 first team, ostensibly first team players on Weir's side who could be facing uncertain futures. Adil Ashish, obviously a very interesting one, bearing in mind that he's playing a lot of first-team football at the moment. Abdullah Bar, who is barely getting a look in whatsoever. And then Nazrusin, who came off the bench for a little cameo yesterday against Portsmouth, but I think it's fair to say isn't hugely part of Labrissa's plans. I mean, those three, have we got any sort of indication on where their futures might lie rather over the coming weeks?
I think reading between the lines from Labris, I think with Rusin, it'll depend on who Sunderland can get in. I think at the moment, as things stand, he's like a squad option. He's come off the bench recently to see games out. I think he likes him, but not as a starter. So I think if Sunderland were to sign like a Louis Barry or a Premier League loanee or somebody else, I could see Rusin going. Abdullah Bar, I think, has to go. Just for the sake of his career, whether that's loan or permanent, he needs to go and play football somewhere at some level. Don't know where that'll be. Possibly abroad. I don't know if I could really see him going on loan domestically for some reason, but I'll probably eat my words on that. Adil Ashish, I think, is an interesting one, isn't it? Because he's done so well, he's performed so well in his two starts that he sort of forced his way back into Labrissa's plans, and I actually think he's a really good option to have, even when everybody is fit. I think you need quality. He can be slightly erratic when he loses the ball in certain positions, and he can be a little bit sort of lax defensively. He's not lazy, like he puts a shift in, but sometimes he's a little bit lax in his defensive work. However, saying that, against Portsmouth, I thought he put a real shift in up and down the left-hand side. So again, can't really see how she's leaving. Actually, in January, the caveat to that is if that Sunderland brought in like 2, 3, 4, 5, then he may go. But I think he's done exceptionally well to come back in and earn his spot. He's a player I like. He's clearly a player Sunderland liked as well. I think it was a 4 or 5 year contract they gave him. He's had absolutely rotten luck as well. I wrote a piece about this when he got his first start, and he came in under Tony Mowbray. He was on the bench. Then I think he started 3 on the bounce, and Mowbray gets sacked. Beale comes in. He comes off the bench against Ipswich, makes a mistake. Beale sort of bombs him out. Then it's Mike Dodds. Again, interim charge until the end of the season. Then he was sort of started another 3 or 4, and then he was out of the team, and then he sort of came in towards the back end of Sunderland season. And then Labris has turned up, so it's another new manager, another new coach and staff. So he's just never really had that run of games and consistency. And at the beginning of this season, I think he came on against Sheffield Wednesday at the Stadium of Light, and then he went 15 match days without playing another minute until the Sheffield United game, which I thought was incredible, really. And for a large part of that, he wasn't even in the squad, which was mad. So his sort of redemption arc's been really impressive. But I like him, and I actually sort of like, from a fan's perspective as well, I hope he stays because he's quite exciting, and I enjoy watching him play football.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that, first of all, there is undoubtedly a player in there. He's a huge talent. I think it's obvious to see that. Whether he's a left winger, and obviously it's a move that's been necessitated by absence, but whether he is actually capable of having a sustained run on that left flank, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure Labrissa's sure, to be perfectly honest with you. I think Ashish himself would certainly say that he's more comfortable in a central role. But that sort of leads into my second point, which is that he really does have to be praised for his application and his attitude, because this is a player who was not even on the periphery. He was just not a part of Labrissa's plans. He's playing under 21s football, wasn't getting any minutes, was barely making match day squads at one point. And yet he's stuck at it. He's evidently shown enough. And this is no reflection. Obviously we don't see behind the scenes, all that sort of stuff. But when the comparison is an Abdullah Bar who isn't getting those minutes, you perhaps look at it and you go, well, maybe Labris is seeing something in Ashish, which he perhaps isn't in Abdullah Bar. That's not a comment on attitude or application or anything such as that. But it does show that Ashish is clearly proven himself in a way that Bar isn't, and I think that the fact that he's been able to stick with it under Labris, he's come back into the side, and not only that, he's not just making up numbers, he is having a positive impact on matches. I think that he really does have to be commended for that. I think that, taking all of that into account, I agree with you. At this exact moment in time, it's kind of difficult to see him leaving. But that being said, when everybody is back and everybody is fit and firing, how much of an opportunity is there for him? And I'm not convinced that there's a massive one. And so it's a difficult decision that Sunderland might have to make as the month goes on, and it's going to be a really intriguing one, I think it's fair to say. But certainly in the here and now, I think Ashish just does deserve a huge amount of praise for the way that he's worked his way back into contention.
I think what you have to say about Sunderland as well is that they're a very good and fair club in not standing in the way of a player if that player wants to go and get first team football. You know, they've done it with like Bailey Wright over the years, from memory. Obviously, there was a sort of a gentleman's agreement with Jack Clark that if Sunderland didn't get promoted, then they would sort of facilitate that move, so they didn't sort of hinder and block his career. And whilst it's not to the same profile and level, if we get to the end of the transfer window, we do have all of these players back. You know, Mundell and Watson on the left. We might have a Louis Barry or somebody of that ilk. Then you've got Riggs, Semed, and maybe a Lafayette or a Glenn Kamara in the middle, and suddenly it's sort of slim pickings again, isn't it? You know, Ashish could play off the right, but then if Pervader's back, I know that's a big if. You've got Aaron Connolly floating around, so that's in an ideal world, I suppose, at the end of January. It's never that simple. You do always pick up injuries. So whilst I don't think someone would stand in his way, it would have to make sense for the club as well. They couldn't leave themselves short. I just think the way it feels at this moment on the 6th of January, that he's going to stay. That could change in 2 weeks. Sunderland might sign 4 players and suddenly it looks very grim for him. But at the moment, I think he stays, and I think he should stay.
Absolutely. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for on this week's show. Join us again next week when we'll be discussing all of the latest Sunderland news and developments. In the meantime, follow all the latest Black Cats news on the Sunderland Echo, or give us a follow on social media as well. Thanks to James, and thanks to you for listening. We'll see you next week.